Imagine standing in the public square of ancient Sicily and hearing the most bone-chilling sound you've ever experienced. A deep, guttural bellowing that seems to come from the depths of hell itself. The crowd around you falls silent. Children start crying. Even hardened soldiers take a step back. But here's what's truly disturbing. This sound isn't coming from any living creature. It's echoing from inside a bronze bull sculpture, perfectly crafted and gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. And the sound, it's so realistic, so haunting, that witnesses described it as the most beautiful and terrifying music they'd ever heard. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus documented these exact scenes in his writings. He described crowds gathering specifically to hear these performances like some twisted ancient concert. People would travel from neighbouring cities just to witness this acoustic nightmare. If medieval engineering nightmares fascinate you, subscribe, because what's inside this bull will haunt your dreams. Archaeological evidence from Akragas confirms these accounts weren't just myth or propaganda. The acoustic engineering was real, the sounds were real, and they were deliberate. What made this even more disturbing was how the crowds reacted. Ancient sources tell us that people didn't just watch in horror, they became entranced by the quality of the sound. Roman writer Lucian described it as having an almost musical quality, like a flute being played by someone who'd never learned proper technique. Think about that for a moment. A sound so perfectly engineered that it fooled entire crowds into believing they were hearing an actual bull in distress. But here's where your blood should start running cold. The bronze bull of Akragas wasn't some ancient sound system or religious artifact. It wasn't designed for entertainment or worship. This masterpiece of engineering had one singular, horrifying purpose. And the realistic animal sounds, they weren't recordings or mechanical reproductions. They were human screams, transformed through pure acoustic genius into something that sounded like animal suffering. The engineering was so sophisticated that it could take the desperate, agonized cries of a human being and convert them into what sounded like the bellowing of a distressed bull. The pitch changes, the rhythm, even the emotional quality, all perfectly disguised. But these weren't the sounds of any animal you'd recognize. They were something far more sinister. The man behind this acoustic nightmare was Phalaris of Akragas, and calling him evil would be putting it mildly. This wasn't some unhinged madman ruling from a cave. Phalaris was the legitimate tyrant of one of Sicily's most prosperous cities from 570 to 554 BCE. He had wealth, power, and an entire civilization at his disposal, and he used it all to perfect the art of human suffering. Here's what historians don't usually tell you about Phalaris. He didn't just execute people, he studied execution. Like a twisted scientist, he experimented with different methods, timing, and psychological effects. Ancient sources record that he would hold what he called innovation sessions with his advisors. Imagine sitting in a marble palace discussing the most efficient ways to terrorize your population over wine and fresh fruit. But here's the truly disturbing part. Regular executions weren't working anymore. You see, Phalaris had a problem. After years of public beheadings, crucifixions, and traditional torture methods, his people were becoming desensitized. The crowds were getting smaller. The fear factor was wearing off. And for a tyrant whose power depended on absolute terror, that was a death sentence waiting to happen. So Phalaris needed something new, something that would draw crowds from across the Mediterranean, something so shocking, so innovative, that it would restore his reputation as the most feared ruler in the ancient world. He needed a method that combined execution with entertainment, punishment with spectacle, death with artistry. Think about the psychology here. This wasn't about justice or even cruelty for its own sake. This was about creating a brand of terror so unique that people would talk about it for generations, and that's exactly what happened. When regular executions became too mundane for this tyrant, he commissioned something that would change torture forever. Enter Perillus of Athens, a man whose brilliant mind would create history's most horrifying marriage of art and agony. This wasn't some hack craftsman looking for quick payment. Perillus was a master engineer, renowned throughout the Greek world for his precision metalwork and innovative designs. He'd built beautiful sculptures, functional architectural elements, even musical instruments. But when he heard about Phalaris's challenge, something dark awakened in his genius mind. Historical accounts describe Perillus as being absolutely obsessed with the project. He spent months perfecting the design, studying animal anatomy to get the proportions exactly right. The bull had to look magnificent, because it would be displayed permanently in Acrogas's main square. But here's where his engineering brilliance becomes truly disturbing. Perillus didn't just design a hollow bronze statue, he created an acoustic masterpiece. Inside the bull, he installed a complex system of tubes and chambers that would transform human screams into realistic animal sounds. Think about the precision required for this. He had to calculate the exact tube diameter, the chamber dimensions, the air pressure requirements. This wasn't random cruelty. This was scientific cruelty. Ancient sources tell us that Perillus was proud of his innovation. He would boast to other craftsmen about the acoustic properties, the temperature control system, even the artistic details of the bull's exterior. He designed a hinged door in the bull's side, perfectly concealed so it wouldn't ruin the aesthetic. The internal tube system was positioned to capture screams at the optimal angle for sound transformation. But the most chilling detail? Perillus included what he called tonal enhancers, metal fixtures inside the tubes that would modify the pitch and rhythm of screams to create more realistic bull sounds. This man didn't just want to kill people, he wanted to turn their final moments into a performance. When Perillus finally presented his creation to Phalaris, he was beaming with pride. Ancient historians describe him demonstrating the acoustic properties using animal sounds, explaining the engineering principles like he was unveiling the greatest artistic achievement in human history. But Perillus had no idea he was about to become the first victim of his own diabolic creation. But here's where Perillus' genius becomes truly disturbing. He understood that human vocal cords change when subjected to extreme heat. As the temperature inside the bull rose, the victim's throat would constrict, their vocal cords would tighten, and the pitch of their screams would naturally shift upward. Perillus designed for this. The tube system had multiple chambers at different points, each one filtering and modifying the sound. The first chamber would catch the initial screams, high-pitched, desperate, unmistakably human. But as the sound travelled through the bronze maze, something horrific happened. The metal tubes would resonate at specific frequencies, dampening the human qualities while amplifying tones that matched animal vocalizations. The curves in the tubes created echo effects that mimicked the natural reverb you'd hear from inside a bull's chest cavity. Ancient sources describe the final sound emerging from the bull's mouth as having an almost musical quality, not just random bellowing, but rhythmic, tonal, eerily beautiful in its realism. Think about the acoustic science here. Perillus had essentially created a massive musical instrument, except the strings were human vocal cords being tortured by bronze and fire. The temperature control was equally precise. Bronze conducts heat slowly and evenly, meaning the internal temperature would rise gradually. This wasn't designed for quick death. It was engineered for sustained performance. Roman writer Pliny the Elder documented that the sounds could last for over an hour, with different tonal qualities emerging as the victim's physical state changed. Early screams sounded like an agitated bull. Later sounds resembled a bull in distress. The final sounds, well, ancient sources describe them as the most haunting animal cries ever heard. But perhaps the most disturbing detail is this. The acoustic system was so effective that people standing just 20 feet away couldn't tell the difference between the bronze bull's sounds and those of an actual dying animal. Perillus had created the perfect acoustic illusion, one that would fool an entire civilization into thinking they were witnessing animal sacrifice instead of human torture. The engineering was brilliant, but the first test would prove that genius and evil make a deadly combination. "You created this masterpiece," the tyrant said with a twisted smile. "You should have the honor of being its first performer." Guards seized the engineer. Despite his desperate struggles, they forced him into the bull through the hinged door he'd designed so carefully. The bronze mechanism clicked shut, a sound that Perillus had probably heard 100 times during construction, but never from this side. Then came the moment that would haunt ancient Sicily forever. As the fire was lit beneath the bull, the crowd gathered closer. They had heard about this new execution device, but nobody knew what to expect. The first sounds were unmistakably human. Perillus screaming, pleading, pounding against the bronze walls he'd crafted with his own hands. But as the temperature rose, something extraordinary happened. The screams began to transform. The acoustic system started working exactly as designed. Perillus' engineering genius was converting his own agony into the realistic sounds of a distressed bull. Phalaris stood transfixed, listening with the concentration of a music critic at a premiere performance. Ancient historians record that the tyrant actually applauded when the sounds reached their most realistic pitch. He called it the most beautiful music ever created by human engineering. The crowd's reaction was even more disturbing. Many people cheered, thinking they were witnessing an incredible technological demonstration. They had no idea they were hearing a man die, because the acoustic illusion was perfect. For over an hour, the bronze bull filled the square with its haunting music. Perillus' final creation had become his tomb. His masterpiece had become his executioner. But here's the truly chilling part. Phalaris was so pleased with the performance that he immediately began planning regular concerts. If you think the inventor's fate was justice, wait until you hear what happened to Phalaris himself. At 15 minutes, 130 degrees, this is where modern medical science tells us that thermal injury begins. The victim's skin would start turning red, like a severe sunburn developing in real time, but they'd still be fully conscious, still able to scream with complete clarity. By 20 minutes, we're talking about 150 degrees inside that bronze tomb. This is where the vocal changes would start. The extreme heat would cause the throat tissues to swell, the vocal cords to tighten, and the pitch of screams to shift upward, exactly as Perillus had calculated. Here's the truly diabolical part. Bronze heats evenly but slowly. This wasn't designed for quick death. At 180 degrees, which would take about 45 minutes to reach, the victim would experience what modern burn specialists call full-thickness thermal injury. But they'd still be alive, still conscious, still producing those perfectly engineered sounds. Medical research shows us that at these temperatures the human body goes through predictable stages. First, intense pain as nerve endings fire frantically. Then, paradoxically, some pain relief as those same nerve endings are destroyed. But the acoustic effects would actually improve during this phase. As throat tissues swelled and contracted, as breathing patterns became more laboured, the sound modifications would become even more realistic. Ancient physicians documented that victims could survive up to 90 minutes inside the bull, with the most musical, sounds occurring in the final 30 minutes when delirium set in. Think about this from Pereleus's engineering perspective. He designed a torture device that got better at its acoustic illusion as the victim got closer to death. The temperature would eventually reach 200 degrees, hot enough to cause unconsciousness, but not before the victim's vocal cords had been transformed into the perfect instruments for creating those haunting bull sounds. Modern forensic science can actually explain why the acoustic illusion worked so well. Extreme heat changes the density of air, the resonance of vocal cords, even the way sound travels through swollen throat tissues. Pereleus had accidentally created the world's most horrific musical instrument, one that played itself through human suffering. But the physical torture was only half the horror. The psychological warfare was even more sophisticated, but the true genius of this torture device wasn't just the physical agony, it was the psychological devastation it inflicted on everyone who witnessed it. Think about what Phalaris had actually created here. By transforming human screams into animal sounds, he'd solved the most fundamental problem of public execution: empathy. When crowds watched traditional executions, they'd see a fellow human being in agony. Some would feel pity, others would question the justice of it all. That emotional connection was dangerous for a tyrant, but the bronze bull, it removed the humanity entirely. Witnesses would hear what sounded like an animal in distress, and animals die every day. No emotional connection, no moral questioning, just entertainment. Ancient sources document the crowd's reactions in disturbing detail. Children would point and laugh at the funny animal sounds. Adults would place bets on how long the performance would last. Street vendors would sell food to spectators gathering for the show. They were witnessing human torture, but their brains were processing it as something completely different. This wasn't accidental. Phalaris understood exactly what he was doing. By dehumanizing his victims through sound, he could torture people in broad daylight while the crowd enjoyed it. But the psychological warfare went even deeper. Some witnesses weren't fooled by the acoustic illusion. Historical accounts mention people covering their ears, leaving the square in horror or having nightmares for months afterward. These were the people who could still hear the human beneath the animal sounds, and that terror, it spread through the city like a plague. Imagine living in Akragas, knowing that at any moment you could be dragged into that bronze nightmare, knowing that your final moments would be transformed into entertainment for your own neighbours, knowing that your death would sound like nothing human at all. The psychological impact was so profound that Roman historians documented cases of people fleeing Sicily entirely just to escape the possibility of ending up in the bull. Phalaris had weaponized sound itself. He'd turned acoustic engineering into a tool of mass psychological control. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect was how the acoustic illusion affected the victims' families. When they heard those animal sounds echoing across the square, they had to confront a horrible reality. Their loved one was dying, but the world was hearing it as music. The bull's reign of terror seemed unstoppable until history delivered its own twisted justice. But every tyrant's reign eventually comes to an end, and Phalaris's downfall was more poetically perfect than any fiction writer could have imagined. After 16 years of terrorizing Sicily, the people of Akragas had finally reached their breaking point. The bronze bull had become too effective, too terrifying. Instead of maintaining order, it had created a population living in constant paralyzing fear. And fear, as Phalaris was about to discover, can be a very dangerous thing to weaponize. The revolution began in 554 BCE, led by a coalition of nobles and citizens who'd had enough of living under the shadow of that bronze nightmare. Ancient sources tell us the uprising was swift and brutal. 16 years of suppressed rage exploding all at once. When the revolutionaries stormed Phalaris's palace, they found the tyrant hiding in his private chambers, desperately trying to negotiate his way out of Sicily. But the crowd had very different plans. They dragged Phalaris through the same streets where he'd forced so many citizens to watch his bronze bull performances. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. This was the same route his victims had taken to their deaths. And when they reached the public square, there it stood, the bronze bull, gleaming in the Mediterranean sun, waiting for its most important performance yet. Historical accounts describe Phalaris's reaction when he realized what was about to happen. The man who'd listened to dozens of victims with cold satisfaction suddenly became desperate. He offered the crowd his entire treasury, promised to destroy the bull, even pledged to go into permanent exile. But after 16 years of terror, the people of Akragas wanted something more valuable than gold or promises. They wanted justice. As the guards forced Phalaris toward the bronze bull, something extraordinary happened. The acoustic engineering he'd been so proud of was about to give the crowd the most satisfying sound they'd ever heard. The door closed. The fire was lit. And for the first time in over a decade, the bronze bull's victim was someone the crowd actually wanted to hear suffer. But here's the most chilling detail. Phalaris understood exactly what was happening to him. He knew the science, he knew the timeline, he knew every horrifying detail of what the next hour would bring. Ancient sources record that his initial screams weren't just from pain, they were from the realization that his own creation was about to transform his agony into entertainment for the very people he'd terrorized. The crowd's reaction was unlike anything witnessed before. Instead of the casual entertainment they'd shown during previous executions, this time they cheered with genuine celebration. They weren't just hearing animal sounds. They were hearing the death of tyranny itself. For 90 minutes, the bronze bull performed its final concert with its most deserving performer, and when the sounds finally stopped, the people of Akragas had reclaimed their freedom through the ultimate act of poetic justice. You'd think this would end the bull's story, but this torture device had a dark legacy that lasted centuries. The Romans added wheels, making their version mobile for travelling executions. The Carthaginians created a smaller version for private torture sessions. Even the Egyptians developed their own variation, shaped like their sacred animals. But it was medieval Europe where the bronze bull's legacy became truly horrifying. During the height of the Spanish Inquisition, church authorities commissioned what they called Toro de Fuego, fireballs designed specifically for executing heretics. Medieval records from Toledo describe public squares filled with the sounds of these bronze nightmares, with crowds gathering after Sunday Mass to witness the purification of souls. Think about that for a moment. The same acoustic principles that Pericles designed for a pagan tyrant were being used by religious authorities to torture people in the name of God. But the most disturbing adaptation came from medieval Germany. Historical accounts describe something called the Iron Maiden Bull, a bronze bull fitted with internal spikes that would slowly penetrate victims as the heat expanded the metal. The engineering had evolved from simple thermal torture to a combination of burning, piercing, and acoustic deception all in one device. Medieval chroniclers document that these devices remained in use across Europe well into the 16th century. The city of Nuremberg alone recorded over 200 executions in their bronze bull between 1450 and 1520. And it wasn't just Europe. Marco Polo's travels describe encountering similar devices in Asia, where Chinese dynasties had developed their own variations using different metals and heating methods. The bronze bull had become a global phenomenon, proof that human cruelty recognizes no cultural boundaries. Perhaps most chilling is that many of these medieval versions were considered improvements over traditional execution methods. church authorities argued that the acoustic illusion made executions more humane for witnesses, completely missing the horrific irony of that logic. The last documented use of a bronze bull execution device was in Spain in 1598, over 2,000 years after Perales first presented his creation to Phalaris. 2 millennia of human progress, and we were still using the same principles of acoustic torture. Even today, this ancient horror continues to impact how we understand human cruelty. So why should we care about a 2,500-year-old torture device? Because the bronze bull reveals something terrifying about human nature that we're still grappling with today. Modern psychologists study the bronze bull as a perfect example of how technology can be weaponized to remove empathy from violence. The acoustic deception didn't just torture victims, it transformed witnesses into unknowing accomplices. Sound familiar? Today's military uses sonic weapons that disorient enemies while remaining invisible to outside observers. The principle is identical, using audio technology to inflict suffering while maintaining plausible deniability. But the most disturbing parallel is how the bronze bull pioneered what we now call dehumanization through technology. By making human screams sound like animal noises, Phalaris created the world's first automated system for removing moral responsibility from torture. Modern genocides use this same principle. Radio broadcasts that refer to victims as cockroaches or animals, propaganda that makes mass murder feel like pest control. Recent archaeological excavations at ancient Acragas have uncovered evidence that supports the historical accounts. Bronze fragments with internal tube systems, burn patterns consistent with sustained high-temperature exposure. Even acoustic analysis of the execution site confirms that sound would have carried exactly as ancient sources described. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was a series of bronze workshops near the execution grounds, evidence that multiple bronze bulls were in production simultaneously. This wasn't just one torture device, it was an industry. The bronze bull forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about human innovation. Every breakthrough in engineering, every advancement in technology, every leap forward in our understanding of physics and psychology, it all carries the potential for both creation and destruction. Perales thought he was creating art. Phalaris thought he was maintaining order. The crowds thought they were watching entertainment. None of them recognized they were participating in one of history's most sophisticated systems of systematic dehumanization, and that's the lesson that echoes across 2,500 years of human history. The most dangerous innovations aren't created by monsters, they're created by brilliant people who convince themselves they're solving problems. If these dark chapters of human innovation disturb and fascinate you, subscribe for more engineering nightmares from history, because humanity's capacity for creative cruelty knows no bounds.